The number one job for a coach is to give feedback to paddlers. All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Today's topic is I hate feedback. And this is a guide behind how to give effective feedback. My mission in doing all this is to help develop community-focused paddlers and leaders. I'm hoping to provide mindset, technique, and coaching talks to support you with your goals. So I'm going to start off with what is a role of a paddler? I think a paddler should be leading by example in terms of how they are training, how they are paddling. They should show up on time and train. They should listen to instructions. They should support one another and be a team player. And I think the most important part is that they should be supporting the team's mission. When we think about what is the number one job of a paddler, I put that as the paddler's job, number one job is to paddle and make improvements. Okay, so outside of that, the paddler should just be focused on getting stronger, getting better timing, getting better technique, getting better endurance, getting more efficient, and making fewer mistakes, whether that is getting injured, whether that is, a bad habit that they tend to do. That is the number one thing that a paddler should be focused on. That is making improvements and minimizing mistakes. If you guys are coaches out there, you know that you are not only coaching, you are also the leader of the team. You are also a recruiter for the team. You're also the trainer. You're thinking of all the workouts. You're the teacher. So you're helping to teach content to and paddling knowledge to your paddlers. Sometimes you might be a parent, and this is a figurative parent. You might be the parent to your paddlers. Sometimes you're the sergeant in arm. You're the one who is drilling them and making sure they get the workout done. And so when we think about what a role of a coach is, they could be a caretaker. It's usually very thankless and very underappreciated. So I wanted to highlight that because when we think about a coach, oftentimes we don't see what's happening in the background. We don't see what's happening. We don't see the 4 hours after work that they're spending coming up with the lineups. We don't see kind of behind the scene work when we think of the coach's responsibility. And so when I think about what is the number one job of a coach, and you can see here, I put a photo here that's kind of hinting at what that number one job is, right? The number one job for a coach is to give feedback to paddlers. And I know that some people will say, oh, the number one job of a coach is to coach. But when we break down what coaching actually means, it is to give feedback to the paddlers. And you can see here, my daughter here is pointing to say, Daddy, you need to bury your blade more, right? She's giving feedback to the paddler. And when we think about giving feedback to a paddler, we want to give positive feedback, but we're also in the role of giving constructive feedback. And I like to call that areas of improvement. We're also here to give encouragement so that paddlers want to get better. We're here to give support so that paddlers can get better. And so these are all breaking down what the job of a coach is. Okay. There are some mistakes on teams around coaching and giving feedback, and I'm going to list kind of the three main ones here. On some teams, sometimes there's not enough coaching from the head coach. And what that means is replace the word coaching with giving feedback, right? If there's not enough feedback and instruction or direction during practice, it can lead to unwanted consequences. Not enough coaching from the head coach can lead to paddlers wanting to step into coach, right? Like if there's a gap of coaching and instruction and direction, sometimes the paddlers that are wanting to take advantage of their time will then step in to try to coach. We also call this bench coaching. And the idea of bench coaching is that the paddlers themselves want to coach other paddlers because of the gap that's created from lack of coaching and lack of instruction from the head coach. And so when we think about what I talked about, the number one job of a paddler is to make improvements to their own paddling. Now, because of the gap of the coaches not coaching, now there's bench coaching happening, and that can lead to unwanted consequences. Okay, so that's one of the biggest mistakes on coaching on teams that can happen. A second one is this one is too many pallors for the coach to coach. And what that means is it could be a big team and the coach isn't able to handle coaching all of the pallors. But also note that depending on where the level of the coach is, they have a certain number of pallors they can coach at one time. More stronger coaches might be able to coach more teams or more crews at one time, more pallors at one time, whereas newer coaches might be fewer coach to pallor ratio. So for example, I give here, if there's one coach to 2 or more dragon boats, it starts getting to be too spread out, right? Or if there's one coach to 2 or more OC6s, it could become too many pallors for a coach to coach, meaning you aren't able to give the feedback and the direction to the pallors to make it feel like they are getting improvement to happen. So what that would lead to is it would lead to bench coaching and also a lack of instructions from the coach, right? So if 2 dragon boats are off in different areas, one coach can only be at one place at one time. And so I offer a solution here, which is you'll need to find a way to delegate to more supporting coaches. So that way you can lower the ratio of a coach to a pallor. Okay, whatever that ratio is, that will work for that coach. The third mistake on teams around coaching and giving feedback is that the pallors who are stepping into coach are actually not aligned with the team's mission. And this could be this might be unintentional. Like, just know that a pallor's job is to focus on palling. The coach's job is to work with the board and kind of fulfill the team's mission. Pallors sometimes aren't in that circle, and so don't really know what the team's mission and how to kind of achieve that. And so the pallors might be doing their best with the best intention, but it might not be aligned with what the coaches are looking for. And so when a pallor ends up stepping into coach without being designated to coach, so I still call this bench coaching, it could lead to clashes in team culture and expectation. So maybe the head coach has a certain expectation and the pallors that are coaching themselves think they know it or know the expectations, but it's actually not the same, and it can lead to some, I guess, awkward feelings within the team. And so these are the 3 mistakes that I feel is pretty prevalent in teams that can be addressed by looking at it. Okay, so I'm going to offer some solutions as to how to give feedback as a coach. So as a coach, tonality matters, and it's important that when you give feedback, that you give it in a neutral and a matter of fact tone. All right, so this way you don't trigger any sort of resistance or guards come up because of how you're giving that feedback. You also should be giving the feedback by name. And so this is part of being a coach. And I say, yes, you'll need to do your best to remember every person's name. When you are able to say the person's name and give feedback in that way, it makes it a lot more personalized, and it makes it so that you can build that relationship. As a coach, I also recommend that you give one piece of feedback every 30 seconds. And so it really shouldn't be like a quiet boat. It shouldn't be, you should be going through the boat row by row and pointing out things that people are doing well and things that people can fix row by row and by name. It's also important to give specific feedback, and specific feedback is going to be better than general feedback. And here's an example, right? If I say row 1, your exit is at the same time as row 2. Good, right? That's very specific. The exit is at the same time. That means the timing's great. Versus a general feedback where I say, good job, good timing, everybody. Good work, right? Notice that one is more specific and can lead to better outcomes than the general, okay? However, I would say if you're not even saying anything for 5 minutes, it is still better to throw in a general feedback than to not have any feedback at all, okay? So again, each of these will build on one on each other. Another tip is to have 5 positive feedback to 1 correction. And just know that even when you identify what is good, it can be just as helpful as pointing out mistakes. So sometimes people, usually coaches are focused on mistakes. Oh, top hand's off. Oh, timing's off. Oh, but sometimes when you can just focus on what is going right, it can then cue the other people to make that adjustment. For example, if I say, whoa, row 1, your top hand is right above, right by your eye level. That is exactly where I want it. Now, everyone else who heard that will adjust their top hand to be eye level, right? So know that the positive feedback can be just as effective as the corrections, and people will respond to that. My last tip for feedback as a coach is 3 strikes and the coach is out. And what that means is I will repeat a feedback for a specific person only up to 3 times. And I'll space it out, right? So minute 1, I might say, hey, your top hand is too low. And then minute 5, I would say, hey, your top hand is still too low. And then after the 3rd time, and I say, hey, your top hand is still too low. If I'm unsuccessful, I will move on and not mention it again. Then after practice, I can go back and check in, hey, did you understand what I mean when I said top hand lower? And usually the answer is, oh, I didn't know that was what you were talking about. And so the idea here is that if I get so frustrated as a coach that they're not getting it after 3 times, just let it go and focus on everybody else, okay? So I have a feedback checklist that I go through when I think about why is my feedback not working? There are three things to this checklist. The first one is a communication limitation. And the idea is, am I even communicating my instructions clearly enough to the paddler, right? So if I'm saying, rotate more, and I'm like, they're still not doing it. Am I communicating my instructions clearly enough to the paddler? It might not have been, right? So if not, then I need to be more specific with my feedback, right? So I got to communicate it more specifically. Hey, I need your left shoulder to rotate towards the front of your seat. I need your inside shoulder to come back towards the steers person. Hey, I need your belly button to turn diagonal to the person on your right, right? So whatever it is, being able to communicate better to make sure the paddler understands what you're trying to have them achieve. If the communication isn't the issue, then the second thing to look at is the physical limitation, right? And here, this is if the person understands my instructions completely, can the paddler physically do the movement that I'm asking them to do, right? So if I'm saying, hey, your shoulder has to be driven back this way, maybe they have a physical limitation that practice or in general that is stopping them from doing that. And so if that is the case, that they cannot physically do the movement, then I will need to make some adjustments to what that paddler will be doing instead, right? The last checklist item is the motivation limitation. And this is where if I'm communicated it correctly and clearly, and they are not physically limited to the movement, is the paddler even motivated to take in the feedback? Okay. And so if the person is not motivated to take in the feedback, then I need to address something that is bigger than just the technique part or just the physical part. Right now, I need to have a check-in with the person and be like, hey, is there even a good relationship here to start off with that is going to help the paddler want to make that improvement? So these are the 3 things that I would recommend every coach kind of go through, but also every paddler, right? When you think about communication, physical, and motivation, where do you stand as a paddler, and how is that being received from the coaches as well? Okay, so I have some tips for coaches, and here I'm helping coach my son here with paddling. Here are some tips for coaches. If you're a coach, start off with giving more feedback in general until it becomes more natural, right? So it's okay to start off with good timing, everyone. Great job, everyone. But slowly, as you develop your coach's voice, start giving more specific feedback. But you got to just keep trying, keep giving it. You can also script out 4 to 5 common feedback that you tend to give and then practice that in front of the mirror. So if you know that you always kind of pinpoint that bottom hand's got to get to the hip, right? Script out what you're going to say to that to give that feedback, and then practice it in front of the mirror so that you can say it at practice. In terms of remembering names, you can use flashcards to help remember names. Okay. As your team gets larger, consider delegating coaching to assistants to help improve the feedback quality for paddlers. Okay, so those are the tips that I have for coaches. If you're a paddler, I also have tips for you in terms of this feedback loop. You want to make sure to support your coaches in clarifying their instructions. So if you're trying to do something and your coach is just saying rotate, 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 it is possible for you to help then support them by asking a clarifying question. Hey, when you say rotate, what would you like my shoulders to do? Hey, when you say rotate, what would you like my belly button to do? So essentially, you're trying to support the coach in making their general feedback more specific, and that can help you get kind of a better understanding on that communication side. If you notice bigger gaps than that in terms of coaching, I would recommend that you bring it up to them privately so that they can have a conversation with you and build in that relationship. And run through the feedback checklist for yourself to see where you're at, right? So when you feel like, oh, I'm not getting it, is it the communication side? Is it the physical side? Or is it the motivation side? Maybe you think you know everything already, and that's why you're not really trusting the coach in what they're saying, right? And so then you might be limiting your own motivation to make that adjustment because you're not being open-minded enough. So I said the last tip is learn to love feedback. So your goal is to become a better paddler. And so how do you become a better paddler? It is by receiving feedback and making those adjustments and then seeing the results after that. Okay. And so I want to put a pitch here. I have a paddling school community online where if you join today, there's a 7-day free trial. You can win money prizes every month, and you can get a weekly workout and access to courses about paddling. The link is right there. Feel free to join. And I want to thank you all for tuning in to today's Tech Talk. If that was valuable to you, please drop a comment, drop a like, or share it to a friend that you think will benefit from this. Thank you so much for tuning in.